Since the dawn of the nuclear age, the United States Navy has lost 2 nuclear submarines. The Royal Navy has lost 0. The French have lost 0. The Soviet and Russian navies have lost 7. But that is only the nuclear fleet. When you factor in the diesel-electric boats, the Soviet number of lost hulls doubles to 14. The U.S. lost 2 diesel-electric subs in that same time frame, bringing their total to 4. Almost 1,000 sailors dead in peacetime. More than 24 catastrophic fires, toxic gas leaks, and reactor meltdowns, all erupting inside sealed pressure hulls hundreds of feet underwater. No other navy in history has recorded a casualty rate like this without fighting a war. This leaves one unavoidable question. How? How does a fleet lose so many submarines, kill so many of its own men in peacetime? From Joseph Stalin to Vladimir Putin, these are the 10 reasons the Soviet and Russian navies lost more submarines and more lives than any other fleet. In the autumn of 1945, the ashes of the Second World War immediately ignited the Cold War. The United States emerged with absolute maritime supremacy, fielding massive carrier strike groups and the atomic bomb. The Soviet Union emerged with a devastated homeland, a massive land army, and virtually no surface fleet to protect its coasts. This severe imbalance forced a radical divergence in naval doctrine. The U.S. Navy, enjoying undisputed global sea control, could afford to focus on a smaller, technologically advanced submarine force built to peacetime standards. Stalin, facing a vast naval inferiority, adopted a doctrine of immediate sea denial, an asymmetrical response that aimed to flood maritime choke points with a huge underwater wall, severing Western supply lines. This strategic necessity gave birth to the quantity mandate, a directive that prioritized the rapid expansion of the fleet above all other considerations. The result was a staggering numerical gap. Between 1945 and 1955, the U.S. Navy commissioned fewer than 40 new submarines. In that exact same decade, the Soviet Union churned out over 230. To meet Stalin's output targets, shipyards like Severodvinsk operated under a command economy, where missing a quota was treated as treason. Soviet naval records document a pattern of shipyard directors bypassing critical weld inspections and ignoring structural flaws just to get hulls in the water. This corner-cutting had deadly consequences. The M256 rushed into service in the early 1950s with a volatile liquid oxygen propulsion system, suffered a catastrophic fire in the Baltic Sea in September 1957. Emergency systems failed, the hull lost integrity, and 35 sailors drowned. The incident report was immediately classified. The first reason for the deadly Soviet record was a production system that valued the sheer number of hulls over the lives of the men inside them. In the United States, construction oversight was handled by a civilian bureau with a mandate for safety. In the Soviet Union, a factory manager who reported a structural defect could lose his life. So, the defects went to sea. Stalin's crash program filled the oceans with cheap steel, but his successor, Nikita Khrushchev, was about to demand something far more volatile, a nuclear-powered missile submarine that could stay submerged for months and threaten the American coast, pursued with such haste that the next generation of Soviet submarines would suffer a string of catastrophic radiation accidents. The K-19's reactor has never been fully proven at sea. The engineers know the coolant system is defective. The boat sails anyway. The Cuban Missile Crisis is looming. Khrushchev is desperate to close the nuclear gap. American submarines already carry Polaris missiles. Safety margins are burned away in the rush. Lieutenant Boris Korchilov, a 23-year-old reactor control officer, leads the repair party. On the 4th of July, 1961, the primary coolant pump fails. The core reaches 800 degrees Celsius. Korchilov and 7 others, with no protective clothing, enter the compartment and jury-rig a cooling loop. They prevent a meltdown. All 8 die of radiation poisoning within 3 weeks. The crew is sworn to secrecy. The lessons of that flawed reactor design are buried, and the systemic failure is not corrected across the fleet. The nuclear sprint was achieved with staggering human courage, but the habit of hiding failure meant Korchilov's sacrifice became not a warning but a template, a secret blueprint for future accidents. Soviet engineers, racing to match the Americans, pushed ahead with stainless steel fuel cladding before its long-term corrosion behavior was understood, a choice that would later contribute to severe reactor failures. And there was a deeper structural difference. In the U.S. Navy, a single independent office, Naval Reactors, under Admiral Rickover, had the authority to veto an unsafe design or stop an unready boat from sailing. The Soviet nuclear program had no such body. There was no safety watchdog with the power to overrule a political deadline. Designers and commanders answered not to an independent nuclear authority, but directly to political masters who demanded results. The submarines could now stay submerged and cross oceans, but the next reason is about what they carried inside their tubes, and what happened when one of those weapons aboard a boat called K-129 met a single spark. The 8th of March, 1968. The K-129 patrols deep in the Pacific, carrying 3 ballistic missiles with liquid-fueled engines. Thousands of miles away, an American underwater hydrophone records an acoustic signature, the unmistakable sound of a violent explosion. The Vietnam War. Soviet submarines shadow American carrier groups globally. Constant readiness pushes maintenance cycles to breaking point. The K-129 vanished with 98 men. The most probable cause, based on declassified U.S. acoustic data and later Russian reviews, is a missile fuel leak inside the tube that led to an explosion. The liquid propellants were TG-02 and AK-27I, hypergolic chemicals that ignite spontaneously on contact, corrosive enough to eat through the missile tube's rubber seals and violently reactive with seawater. Checks were likely rushed. The submarine became the victim of its own weapon. The drive to field ever more powerful and volatile arms introduced a new category of risk, the submarine as its own executioner. A pattern that would repeat with different weapons for the next 3 decades. Secrecy ensured that other missile boat crews never understood the full danger. The weapons were deadly. But the next reason is about the submarine itself. A boat built to outrun any torpedo, dive deeper than any enemy, and push physics so far that its own reactor could never be shut down safely. The Alpha-class submarine could burst to around 41 knots, faster than the American torpedoes at the time designed to kill it. But her reactor, once started, cannot be stopped. The Alpha uses a lead-bismuth eutectic as coolant. Below 125 degrees Celsius, this liquid metal solidifies into a dense radioactive mass. The reactor must remain heated at all times, even in port, or the core is permanently destroyed. There is no secondary shutdown procedure that leaves the coolant liquid. Early 1970s, the U.S. Navy dominates the oceans with its fast carrier strike groups. Moscow responds with the Project 705 Alpha, an underwater interceptor built to hunt them, titanium hull, extreme depth, and a reactor cooled by liquid metal. The Alpha's engineering crew lived with a permanent logistical nightmare. If shore power failed, the coolant could freeze within hours, destroying the boat. Multiple near misses occurred. Maintenance was nearly impossible. And when the reactor loop leaked, it filled the ship with deadly polonium-210 aerosols, giving the Alpha crews the highest radiation doses in the fleet. The Alpha was a marvel that was, in everyday operation, a continuous crisis. This was the performance trap. Performance without margin creates a machine that cannot fail safely. The Alpha's difficulties fed directly into the next deadliest reason, but not only because of what burned. The same obsession with speed and automation had systematically eliminated the one thing a submarine in trouble needs most: hands to fight the fire. Because the same design philosophy that created the Alpha also turned the inside of every Soviet submarine into a tinderbox and then removed the men needed to stop it burning. The next reason is fire, but not the fire you escape, the fire built into the walls. The 7th of April, 1989. Deep inside the K-278 Komsomolets, a ruptured hydraulic line sprays atomized oil across a hot electrical panel. The flashover is instantaneous. Built to outdive the U.S. Navy, going to depths U.S. submarines and torpedoes couldn't reach, the experimental titanium Komsomolets pushed automation to the absolute limit. Its skeleton crew was just 69 men, about half of an LA-class submarine. When Compartment 7 ignited, that automation became a fatal flaw. A larger crew can rotate fresh firefighters. On the Komsomolets, the tiny crew was fatally overwhelmed. In 1,000 degrees Celsius heat, there simply weren't enough fresh hands to hold the line. Compartment 7 had become a tinderbox. Survivability was sacrificed for innovation. They had the technology to build the ultimate submarine, but not the manpower to save it. The Komsomolets crew fought until they were overwhelmed. We will return to this, but across the fleet, the system was breaking its men before they even left the pier. Rewind 6 years to 1983. In the dark of the K-429, seawater violently floods through a ventilation shaft left open by shipyard workers and missed by an exhausted, unfamiliar crew. The Cold War is bankrupting Moscow. The Navy's relentless operational tempo leaves zero time for rest, training, or basic maintenance. Meeting quotas was the mandate. Captain First Rank Nikolai Suvorov had begged command to delay the drill. His regular crew was on leave, and his submarine was actively undergoing repairs. Fleet Command didn't care. They forced him to sail with a patchwork crew of strangers from 5 different boats to meet a torpedo quota. Ordered to dive minutes after casting off, the submarine was a time bomb. When the sea burst through the open shipyard shafts, a fatal error masked by a broken warning light that terrified conscripts brutalized by vicious hazing, Dedovshchina. They were too afraid to report. It was the final blow in a chain of top-down negligence. 16 men drowned. To hide their own negligence, the state scapegoated Suvorov, and the KGB arrested him for the disaster. A military that pushes its people past the breaking point creates a broken crew. The dead were victims of a ruthless system that prioritized quotas over human life. The K-429 proved the fleet was breaking their men, but the blazing Komsomolets was about to prove the state couldn't save them. Reason 4 returns to 1989, to an ocean filled with dying men. The 7th of April, 1989. The burning Komsomolets breaches the surface. The crew abandons ship. But what kills them isn't the fire. It's the freezing Norwegian sea and an empty sky. The Soviet Union is collapsing. They can still forge billion-dollar submarines, but the basic infrastructure to support them is rotting away. Captain Evgeny Vanin ordered his men into the water. 42 died, mostly from severe hypothermia. Immersion suits leaked, life rafts capsized, rescue aircraft arrived late and practically empty-handed. The Arctic Ocean turned every minute of state delay into a death sentence. Vanin went down with his ship. The gap between what the Soviet Navy could build and what it could save was a chasm. That chasm was the rescue gap. The fire sparked the crisis, but the state's logistical rot finished it. In the 1990s, the Soviet Union died, but the submarines remained, rusting, decaying, waiting. Reason 3 is the silent accumulation of risk that set the stage for the worst disaster of them all. A nuclear submarine rots at a crumbling Arctic dock. Its captain hasn't seen a paycheck in 6 months. Deep inside the hull, the primary reactor coolant pump has been stripped for parts, and nobody knows if the backups will even fire. The decay accelerated.
Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate.
The Cold War is over. Russia inherits the Soviet Navy, but not the Soviet budget. The Northern Fleet becomes a ghost armada, its boats gnawed by salt, ice, and neglect. Dozens of near misses, reactor leaks, electrical fires, batteries exploding. No single disaster made global headlines, but every unrepaired fault accumulated. Maintenance schedules were abandoned, spare parts were not produced. The post-Soviet decade did not produce a Kursk. It produced the conditions for a Kursk. Deferred maintenance, absent training, crippling poverty, they turned an aging fleet into a dormant disaster, and the rot infected even the newest ships. That trigger was pulled in August 2000. A single microfracture on a Type 65 practice torpedo loaded with highly volatile hydrogen peroxide transformed a state-of-the-art Russian submarine into a 154-meter coffin. Reason 2 is the Kursk. The 12th of August, 2000, 11:28 a.m. A violent explosion rips through the forward tube of the K-141 Kursk after a practice torpedo leaks its volatile propellant. The crippled boat slammed the seabed. 135 seconds later, a second cataclysmic blast obliterated the bow. High-Test Peroxide, a concentrated oxidizer that decomposes explosively on contact with metal, releasing superheated steam and pure oxygen. The Kursk's Type 65-76 torpedo used HTP as its oxidizer. A single leak in the casing meant an uncontrollable chain reaction. Putin has just become president, eager to restore prestige. The Northern Fleet runs its first large-scale exercise in years. Western observers watch. Down in the dark, that second cataclysmic blast obliterated the front half of the submarine, instantly killing 95 of the 118 crew members. But deep in the stern, 23 men survived the devastation. They retreated to the 9th compartment, sealed the bulkhead, and waited for a rescue team. The highest-ranking officer left alive, 27-year-old Lieutenant Commander Dmitry Kolesnikov, took command of the survivors. In the freezing, rapidly flooding space, he maintained strict military discipline and took a meticulous roll call of his men so they would not be forgotten. But as the emergency power died and the oxygen began to run out, the reality of their situation set in. Trapped in the pitch black, Kolesnikov first wrote a personal farewell to his wife Olga. "Olechka, I love you. Don't worry too much." Hours later, as the emergency batteries finally died, he logged their final moments. "It's dark to write here, but I'll try by touch. It seems there are no chances, 10 to 20%. Greetings to everyone. No need to despair." Above them, the Russian Navy, paralyzed by pride and secrecy, refused foreign assistance for days.
By the time they finally accepted help and Norwegian divers reached the seabed to knock on the steel hull, they were met with silence. The world watched the desperate failed rescue unfold on live television. All 118 men had died. The Kursk was the full convergence of every previous reason: a volatile weapon, a poorly maintained fleet, an exhausted crew, a tiny damage control party outnumbered by the casualty, and a command structure that prioritized secrecy over rescue. But the Kursk did not come from nowhere. It was the inevitable product of a single overriding reason that stretched from Stalin's first classified report to Putin's press conference. Reason 1 is not a torpedo. It is a closed door that never opened.
The immediate reflex after any accident on a Soviet submarine was not to call for help. It was to stamp the incident report secret and lock it in a safe. From Stalin's obsession with control to Putin's grip on the news, the state treated transparency as the enemy. A single defect report could end a career faster than a torpedo. Problems weren't fixed, they were buried until they killed. K-19 survivors were silenced. K-429's captain was scapegoated. After the Kursk, Moscow blamed a NATO submarine. In 2019, when Lusherik burned and 14 officers died, the Kremlin announced the details would be limited for national security. Same reflex almost a century later. The single greatest reason for so many disasters is a secret culture, a culture that systematically suppressed the truth. Every catastrophe carried a lesson, and every lesson was sealed away. A continental power facing a richer maritime rival, Moscow chose effective over safe. That arithmetic rewarded brittle designs, reactors that couldn't be shut down, titanium that cracked, torpedo fuels that exploded on contact. An open system can turn a disaster into a safeguard. After USS Thresher went down, the Navy built SubSafe, a public independent certification that caught fatal defects before a boat ever left port. A closed system does the opposite. Its instinct is containment. The Soviet Union never had a Thresher moment because no disaster was ever permitted to become a reckoning. The disasters shown in this video are less than half the total. The sailors showed staggering courage, but they were shock absorbers for flawed engineering. A Navy without an independent safety voice, where admitting failure is forbidden, isn't unlucky, it is designed to repeat its tragedies. From Stalin to Putin, one truth remains. A Navy that cannot learn from its dead is condemned to bury more. And the silence, in the end, is its own disaster.